First exhibited in 2010 at the Shanghai World Expo, one attraction still draws over 7,000 visitors a day. This is a giant animated version of China's greatest painting, its Mona Lisa, the Qingming Scroll, which depicts the city of Kaifeng at the height of the Sung dynasty, one of the great economic high points in Chinese history, and in which today the Chinese see a mirror of their own times. Originally commissioned in the 11th century, the scroll is a fantasy image of the world the emperor wanted his China to be: harmonious, well-governed, secure, and almost exclusively male. For what's astonishing is of the 814 people in the scroll, there are only 20 women.
There's a couple of concubines in a tavern, there's some women shopping, there's some mothers with their children, there's a couple of veiled widows, a woman in a sedan chair eating noodles, and some servants. But of course, this isn't meant to be a picture of the real world of the 12th century. This is an idealized view of the Confucian world, where everybody knew their place, where the men belonged to the public realm, leading busy and active lives, and women were in the private realm, behind closed doors, where they were chaste, obedient, and utterly beholden to their husbands.
These ideals have become one of the defining marks of Chinese civilization, part of yin and yang, and their influences waxed and waned over women's lives, not just in China, but across Asia. Empowered by other faiths, women found ways to defy the limits placed on their sex. In Vietnam, warrior princesses led the first revolution against Chinese rule. In Japan, women became the creators of national culture. And in China, many court women became the power behind the throne. Yet, confining women to the home, these limitations also gave rise to ideals of beauty that advocated chastity and immobility, which culminated in one of the most unsettling cliches in Asian history, the ritual of foot binding, whose legacy would live on to the 20th century. 'Today, Vietnam is known for its strong women, home to the largest women's union in the world, 15 million members and counting. Women are a vital part of its economy, a tradition that goes back 2,000 years to when Vietnam was born. And it's a story that reveals much about Vietnam's complicated relationship with its most powerful neighbor, China. In the 1st century BC, northern Vietnam was home to a tribal Red River culture, in which women had equal power and equal rights with men. They could become clan rulers and queens, operate businesses, and inherit property, even have multiple husbands. But all this changed dramatically when Vietnam was conquered by the Han dynasty of Imperial China in 111 BC.
The Chinese not only imposed their own taxes and laws on this country, but they also replaced the ancient Vietnamese tradition of giving women a greater role in society. They replaced it with the Chinese concept of political authority, and this was entirely male and based around the concept of the patriarchal family system. What this meant for women was that their role and status in society was drastically reduced.
Not surprisingly, the Vietnamese bitterly resented this interference in their way of life, and they soon began to rebel. The most important uprising began in Mei Lin in 41 AD, led by two women, Trung Trac and her sister, Ni.
These two remarkable women were the first to fully mobilize Vietnam and to lead it to rise up against Chinese rule and to fight for independence.
In defiance of Chinese ideas of gender, the Trung sisters, the daughters of a local military chief, raised an army of 80,000, led by both male and female generals, and after a series of victories, crowned themselves kings. But the Trung sisters' success was not to last. 2 years later, in 43 AD, the Chinese emperor sent his most celebrated general, Ma Wan, a man so feared in his own country that he was known as the Tamer of Waters. Cornering the sisters in the paddy fields outside Mei Lin, he engaged them in a final desperate battle where they mounted their elephants in what was, in effect, a suicide mission.
As expected, General Ma routed the army, slaughtering thousands. And then, with the sisters out of the way, he easily went on to pacify the rest of the country.
The defeat of the Trung sisters was a double catastrophe for Vietnam. It became a Chinese colony for the next 900 years. And under Chinese rule, Vietnamese women were turned into second-class citizens. But it was the Trungs who had the last word. National festivals, like this one in downtown Hanoi, have been celebrating the sisters since the year 939, when Vietnam finally won back its independence from China. And despite their defeat, the legend of the Trung sisters has become central to Vietnamese national identity, not just against the Chinese, but against later invaders, even inspiring many women to join the Viet Cong in the Vietnam War.
Bởi vì là cái cuộc khởi nghĩa Hai Bà Trưng mở đầu cho một cái lịch sử của dân tộc Việt Nam. Chúng tôi đứng lên đánh đuổi ngoại xâm, không cam chịu làm nô lệ để giành cái nền độc lập cho dân tộc. Với một cái tinh thần là giặc đến nhà đàn bà cũng đánh, và chúng tôi là những cái người Việt Nam và cũng là phụ nữ Việt Nam thì hết sức là tự hào vì mình được là con rồng cháu tiên.
The veneration of the Trung sisters, their status as living gods to whom thousands come to pray for security and safety, is a clear example of how the identity of nations is so often defined by the roles women play within them.
It's absolutely telling, in fact, that there are two national versions of their story. In the first version, the Vietnamese version, the sisters chose to drown themselves rather than be taken alive. The Chinese version, General Ma executed them and then he sent their heads back to China as a trophy. The Chinese really regarded the sisters as this kind of grotesque social aberration. The sisters left behind any legacy at all in China. It was simply in that enduring battle of the sexes, there was only ever going to be one outcome.
At the time of the Trung sisters' rebellion, the Chinese imperial court was located in Luoyang, a sprawling city on the ancient Yellow River, the cradle of Chinese civilization that went back 3,000 years. Lasting for over 4 centuries, the Han Dynasty was a golden age in Chinese history. Its achievements included the establishment of the Silk Road, the completion of the Great Wall, and a flowering of culture and innovation that was unrivaled anywhere in the world except Rome. This was when the China we know today was born, and at the heart of its identity was the revolutionary philosophy of Confucianism, a unique system of ethics which stressed the primacy of social harmony, legitimized Han rule, and which brought order to a growing empire.
What was so attractive about Confucianism to the emperors was that it promoted a deeply hierarchical and patriarchal social order, one in which every citizen had a rank and place. At the top and center of it all was the emperor, and he received his mandate to rule from heaven above. Below him was the apparatus of the state, and this was peopled all by Confucian scholars, and they're all male, of course. And below them was the citizenry.
This was divided into 4 categories. At the very top was the Shi, the scholar gentry. Next came the Nong, the peasant farmers. After them came the Gong, the artisans and craftsmen, and below them, because they didn't produce anything, came the Shang, the merchants and traders.
There was also the family, and this too had its own set of hierarchical relationships. The most important was father to son, then elder to younger, husband to wife, mother to daughter, all the way down till you get to the daughters-in-law, and they had to answer to everyone. I'm afraid to say that there's no getting away from the fact that in the Confucian social order, women were at the very, very bottom of the pile.
An essential, if not the essential building block of these Confucian ideas was a canon of literature. Edited, compiled, and carved in stone by male scholars during the Han Dynasty, they were called the Confucian Classics. Originally a set of 5 books from antiquity, China's equivalent of the Bible, the Quran, or the Torah. In terms of social roles, the key book was called the Li Ji, the Book of Rights, and it governed all aspects of both state and individual behaviour, from court ceremonies and banquets to rules of conduct for men and women inside and outside the home.
女子出门必拥蔽其面，夜行以烛无烛则止。道路男子由右，女子由左。
At its heart is the message that for women, the Tao, meaning the proper way, can only be expressed through their roles as wives and mothers. And all the rituals governing their behaviour are there to uphold the feminine virtue of obedience. This is later clarified to be the 3 obediences: obedience to father, husband, and then to grown-up son. And women didn't only have a proper role to play, they also had a proper place. And this was inside the home, the private realm known as the nei. By contrast, men belonged to the outer realm, the world of business, of culture, of government and education. This was the public sphere, known as the wide, and women were completely excluded from it. Of course, in real life, some women did play a part in the wide, but according to the book, they had no moral right to do so.
男不言内，女不言外，非饥非丧，不相受气。
But the Confucian classics were also tied to a set of ancient beliefs that went back to the origins of Chinese civilization. Carved around 175 AD, this is a precious fragment of the oldest book in the classics, the I Ching. A deeply mystical divination manual dating back to the 2nd millennium BC. It taught the ancient cosmological belief that the harmony of the human social world was aligned with the harmony of the heavens. When each member of society observed the proper rites and kept their place, the cosmos remained stable. But if these rites and roles were transgressed, then heaven wreaked havoc in the form of famine, plagues, and political collapse. Strongly linked to this idea was the concept of yin and yang. Originating as patterns of light and shadow on the land, yin and yang evolved into a philosophy of complementary energies that balanced the world, light and dark, heaven and earth, sun and moon. And to them, scholars added the genders, making yin feminine and yang male. But whereas at the beginning, yin and yang were perfectly balanced, the Han scholar Dong Zhongshu reinterpreted the idea to make yin inferior to yang.
Giving yang a male essence that took precedence over yin, the female essence, became part of the Confucian canon. The inferiority of women was now the natural order of things, and patriarchy wasn't man-made, it was divinely ordained. It's the age-old story of men giving themselves the benefit of God on their side.
These ideas, so central to Chinese identity, have left a long shadow over gender relations in China. They are still debated in lecture halls across the country.
那么应该讲呢，他虽然认为阴处于从属和卑微，他仍然承认呢，阴对阳有助之功。我们英文可能可以讲 harmony，right？ 就是这是非常重要的。那么也是我们中国性别关系的一个特征，不是紧张的、非常紧张的那种对立。那么下面呢，我想提一个问题，就是你们对董仲舒的性别观念有什么看法？
我觉得董仲舒他虽然提到夫妻和合，但是他在一些说法当中的一些隐喻，我觉得是有一些明显的男女不平等的一些因素。比如他说阳尊阴卑，比如他说那个君臣父子夫妻，他都是把那个夫妻的夫，把那个父子的父放在前边，而把相对地位来说好像有点低微的一些放在后边，所以他在这种语言表达上、这种体系上就有点一种隐喻，可能就是这个系统里边，我觉得它的消极因素是有的。
Why Han scholars were so obsessed with gender has everything to do with the context in which they formulated their ideas, for they were reacting directly to the power of women in the Han court, in particular concubines and empresses who, in their eyes, constituted the greatest threat to imperial stability.
In the first place, the concept of the inner and outer realms favoured the concubines. They lived in the inner quarters, they had the greatest access to the emperor, and they could funnel vast amounts of patronage to their families, who often led palace coups in a bid to have even greater power. And second, it was the contradictions within Confucianism itself, specifically the concept of filial piety, which demanded absolute obedience towards parents and grandparents. This gave the 16 empress dowagers of the Han dynasty incredible status and power. Filial piety meant then, as it does now in contemporary China, that the authority of gender was always trumped by the authority of age.
One of the ways Han scholars tried to resolve these contradictions was by writing a collection of Confucian classics for women, essentially manuals for female behaviour that ran parallel to the carved classics studied by men. The first was called the Li Nu Zhuan, a collection of 125 biographies of exemplary women from the past, compiled by the male scholar Lu Zhang. Divided into 8 chapters, from maternal models to the chaste and compliant, such as widows who cut off their own noses to protect their virtue, Lu Zhang embedded 2 key messages in his book. The first, in the chapter Depraved Favourites, was a warning that women who overstepped their roles brought disharmony to the state. And the second, in the chapter Accomplished Rhetoricians, was that women were obliged to dispense Confucian wisdom to their rulers and husbands. Over time, the characters of the biographies of exemplary women became instantly recognizable archetypes, standards of behavior against which women were genuinely judged right up to the 20th century. But arguably, it was another book whose influence was more profound because it was written by a woman. This was the Nu Ji, Disciplines for Women, written by Ban Chao, who was born into a family of eminent Han scholars.
好，我们看一下这个，这就是他讲的啊。作为一个汉代上层的知识女性，班昭呢实际认同了儒家关于男女有别这个是孔子说的男尊女卑啊，这个董仲舒他们也是这样讲的。
Written for her daughters, in the Nu Ji, Ban Chao made obedience to in-laws and husbands the be-all and end-all of female behaviour, reaffirming not just the 3 obediences, but also the 4 feminine virtues: morality, propriety in speech, modest appearance, and diligent work.
那女界在当时的社会背景下是有它的合理性的，然后一方面它就 教育那个女性嘛，然后就让女性怎么做。还有一个就是他对家庭里面的夫妻的和谐，还有维护家庭的和睦，还有社会稳定都有积极作用的。但是呢，从后世的长远来看，它消极作用又很大，因为它就压抑了女性嘛，然后就使女性丧失独立的人格。
Banja was the foremost Confucian scholar of her age, and she was known to have ruled her own family with a rod of iron. So why did she write a book that advocated the exact opposite for other women? But whatever her motivations, the New Ji went on to become the core of the Confucian classics for women, and the heavily restrictive ideas that it contained about feminine virtue ultimately became the only model that could be followed.
These gender ideals became one of the defining hallmarks of Chinese civilization, which it exported to conquered countries like Vietnam. But by expanding and exporting, China also made its borders porous to new ideas heading the other way, one of which, Buddhism, would provide Confucianism with its first major challenge. Arriving down the Silk Road in the 2nd century during the Han, by the Tang dynasty in the 7th century, it had effectively become the state religion. And by this time, it had developed a distinctly universalist message, for not only did it extend salvation to everyone, regardless of race or gender, but with its numerous female deities and ideas on reincarnation, it suggested that gender, like all polarities, was ultimately meaningless. And as such, it offered women an alternative way. Perhaps the best place to see the impact Buddhism had on Tang dynasty women is at the Longmen grottos on the outskirts of Luoyang, where thousands of Buddhist shrines are carved into the rock face, most commissioned by the Tang elite. At its center is the great Vairocana Buddha, paid for by Empress Wu Zetian, the wife of the 3rd Tang Emperor Gaozong. Said to have been modeled in the Empress's own image, it's a bold statement of power, showing how Tang women use Buddhist imagery to give themselves a public face.
Empress Wu defied the Confucian model of womanhood. She came from a very humble family, the 2nd daughter of lumber merchants, but because of her pretty face, they dispatched her to be a concubine to the Emperor's palace. Although she was only 5th rank, she was able to claw her way to the top, going from being concubine to the old emperor to wife of the new emperor Gaozong. To be intimate with both father and son was considered incest by the Confucian scholars and a shocking crime in itself. They accused her of hundreds of crimes, but topping them all was deposing her 2 sons and ruling not just as empress, but emperor for 15 years and founding her own dynasty. Empress Wu literally shattered the cosmic order of yin and yang.
To this day, Empress Wu is the only woman in Chinese history to have ruled China in her own right. And ever since, she's been caricatured as the ultimate evil woman. But in reality, it was her skill in promoting Buddhism as a challenge to the Confucian order that secured her power. In 690, Empress Wu found 2 obscure prophecies that foretold the emergence of a female ruler, who would be the reincarnation of one of Buddha's most revered bodhisattvas, the Messiah figure, Maitreya.
Empress Wu used these 2 prophecies as a pretext to build her own caves in the Longmen grottos. And to drive home the point, she had Maitreya placed front and center, and once again she had her features carved onto the face, while she had the Buddha shunted all the way to the side. As far as we know, this is the only instance of this happening throughout all of Buddhist art, of Maitreya taking such precedence over the Buddha.
Professor Meng Man, a specialist in the era of the Tang, is one of the rising stars of Chinese history. I wanted to ask her about the context of Empress Wu's rule.
Do you think Empress Wu could have seized power any time, or actually, do you think it was a case of her being in the right place at the right time?
事实上，这也是她能掌权的一个很重要的理由。唐朝的时候，儒学还没有定于一尊，就是儒学在中国思想中还不是占有独一无二的地位，还有佛教，还有道教。并不是说佛教和道教一定对女性有什么优待，只是说呢，它可以提供不同的思想来路。
One of the ways Empress Wu drew on this alternative ideology was by giving herself a new name. A deeply transgressive act, not just because this was the patriarchal privilege of fathers, but also because she created a new character that was inspired by the I Ching, China's most sacred book. It was the symbol for the sun on the left and the moon on the right, illuminating the sky or the world below.
什么意思呢？日在中国古代它有一个固定的意象，太阳代表着阳，代表着男性 male， 而月亮 moon 它代表着阴性，代表着 female 女性。所以事实上，武则天把日和月都放在她的名字里，然后说他们一起在上空照亮这个世界，其实本身就是对性别的一种磨灭。她 不希望自己是男性，也不希望说自己是女性，它其实是超越性别的这样的一个存在。
Empress Wu owed her extraordinary rise to the city into which she was born. By the 7th century, the Tang capital was Chang'an, today's Xi'an. Home to near 2 million people, it was the great metropolitan wonder of the East, rivaled only by Baghdad and Constantinople. Linking the ports of the South China Sea with Central Asia at the end of the Silk Road, Chang'an stood at the center of a Chinese empire at its greatest ever breadth. The Silk Road began here, attracting merchants from as far afield as Arabia and Japan, and they brought with them their own languages, customs, and religions. Buoyed by the Silk Road's flow of riches and ideas, this was a stable, vibrant economy that looked outward, in which women were able to escape the more restrictive confines of Confucianism. And that freedom can be seen on display in the city's museums. For alongside the camels and the foreign traders of the 7th century Silk Road, women are everywhere in their art. The Tang were part descended from steppe nomads with their more egalitarian attitudes to gender. So in contrast to Han ideals of segregation, Tang women are sensuous and unveiled. They often appear on horseback playing polo, another import from the steppes. And it's the objects of women's finery, not their chastity, that fill the displays. From silver mirrors and bronze feather hairpins to elaborate powder boxes and multicolored silk robes with exotic headdresses. It's no surprise that their favorite flower was the luscious and deeply un-Confucian peony.
它是很包容的，所以呢，它相对也是比较开放的，所以造就了唐朝女性不同于别的朝代，它是相对思想是比较自由的，女性是比较思想也比较开放的。我是觉得现代的女性她更多的去向往自由，向往着一些各个方面的平等，我是觉得跟唐人的那个当年的那个追求是有很多相似之处。
In the basement of the Shanxi History Museum in Xi'an, restorers are working on a series of Tang frescoes from the tomb of Empress Wu's niece, Wu Huifei. Incredibly well preserved after 14 centuries below ground, the women being gradually revealed aren't the two-dimensional archetypes of the biographies of exemplary women, but flesh and blood individuals with strong expressions, gestures and clothing styles, from revealing gowns to jodhpurs and caps. But it would be a mistake to think that the Tang was only about luxury and fashion. Empress Wu was determined to give women real agency and power too.
Empress Wu was a woman of tremendous energy, and she wasn't afraid to implement radical changes. She created the first professional civil service, she completely reformed the tax code, and she increased China's trade and diplomacy. But to my mind, what's really impressive is what she did for women. She wasn't afraid to challenge Confucian norms. For example, she promoted both men and women equally and solely on the basis of merit. So that included both her niece, Empress Wei, her daughter, Princess Taiping, and Shangguan Wana, the first female prime minister, who was a palace slave who rose all the way to the top job 1,400 years before her modern counterparts. There will always be unanswered questions about Empress Wu, but one thing is for certain, she was a true visionary.
The story of Empress Wu has long been a source of intense fascination, particularly for modern Chinese women. But her extraordinary life has been reduced to a cliched narrative about female lust, murder, and corruption. In storylines made much of in drama ever since, she allegedly smothered her own daughter, poisoned vast numbers of relatives, and in her 80s enjoyed a personal harem of male lovers. There's no doubt that, like many emperors, Wu killed anyone who got in her way. But the most lurid stories were written centuries after her death by historians keen to reassert the Confucian order.
但是历史上为什么要突出它的残暴呢？第一点，我觉得，人们在评价女性政治人物的时候，首先都会从道德角度去考虑，而评价男性政治人物的时候，都会从功绩的角度去考虑。所以实际上，他的杀人可能就比其他的男性皇帝杀人要罪恶深重一些。是衰老了吗？
Empress Wu's story is much more than one woman's rise to power. It was her life's ambition to establish her own dynasty. But after her death, her daughter, niece, and prime minister were all murdered. And when the Tang dynasty collapsed in the 10th century, inevitably Tang women were blamed for invoking the displeasure of heaven.
Do you think historians have unfairly blamed women for the fall of the Tang dynasty?
是的，唐朝以后的妇女也好，不是唐朝以后的史学家也好，唐朝以前的史学家也好，把这个很多王朝的没落归到妇女身上，这是一个历史传统哈。比方说我们讲，中国古代王朝的灭亡的时候，常常会讲到一个很坏的女性形象。
Perhaps the best example of how divided China has been about Empress Wu, and more widely about women in power, is her tomb on the outskirts of Xi'an. Designed by the Empress herself, it is crowned not with phoenixes, the usual symbol for royal women, but with dragons, the symbol of a male emperor. But in comparison to the 8,000-word eulogy she inscribed on the tomb of her ineffectual husband, hers is hauntingly empty.
It's a great irony that Empress Wu achieved so much in her lifetime, and yet, after her death, her successors did everything they could to obliterate her memory. Exhibit A is her memorial, her stele. The fact that it was intentionally left blank was the ultimate mark of disrespect, of dishonour. Just as bad are the twisted stories that historians wrote about her and presented as fact. Yet the allegations that she murdered her own child, that she was some kind of sex-crazed lunatic who believed in black magic, these are just the old hoary cliches that were trotted out against every woman in power in every culture. To my mind, the missing words on Empress Wu's stele are part of a wider missing dialogue in Chinese history about women's lives and how they really were, as opposed to just how they were meant to be. It's very telling that it would be 1,200 years before another female leader would emerge in China, Empress Cixi in the 19th century. And even today, in modern China, when motherhood is just one of many options open to women, the fact remains that in government and politics, it's still a male preserve.
At its peak, the cultural and economic clout of Tang China was so enormous that its influence spread across Asia, rippling eastwards to Korea and even to Japan, which, unlike Vietnam, embraced Chinese culture voluntarily. In the 7th and 8th centuries, in order to put an end to clan warfare, Japan imported the Chinese imperial model to create a centralized state with a capital, a court, and an imperial family headed by an emperor. And alongside Confucianism, Japanese ambassadors returned from China with everything from laws and literature, fashion and art, even technology and town planning. When it was built in 794, Kyoto, called Heian-kyo, was a mini copy of the Tang capital. The language of court politics was Chinese, and every male was expected to learn the Confucian classics by rote. And they imported Buddhism too, as in China, by the 8th century, it had become the state religion. But what differed about Japanese Buddhism is that it merged with the local religion, Shinto, whose ideology was very different.
Of all the differences between the two religions, what really shocked the Chinese about Shinto was the central role played by women. And not just on a practical level as shamans, but fundamentally at the heart of the religion.
Shinto's chief deity was female, Amaterasu, the goddess of the sun, while her brother, Tsukuyomi, was the god of the moon, the exact inverse of yin and yang.
The upshot of this tolerance for women in positions of power was that the Chinese referred to Japan as queen country. And I'm not sure they meant this as a compliment.
By the 11th century, now known as the Heian era, power was returning to more Japanese lines. The emperor was nothing more than a symbolic head beholden to the clans, in particular to one family, the Fujiwaras, whose strategy of marrying their daughters off to the imperial family was central to their dominance. This system of marriage broking was adopted by all noble families, and it led to strange tensions in the status of women, where Confucianism was used to bolster the clan family, not imperial rule. Unlike in China, wives lived separately from their husbands. Amorous affairs were tolerated, and women could own and inherit property so as to keep it within their father's control. But confined to the inner world of the home, Heian women lived in separate compounds, were only allowed to converse with men from behind kicho screens, and their only recourse to the outside world being court festivals and pilgrimages to Buddhist temples. And so, within their gilded cage, Heian women developed a distinctly Japanese aesthetic that moved away from the fashions of Tang China. Long hair, pearl-white faces and black teeth, gardens that brought the outside world in and miniaturized it, and junihito kimonos of up to 40 layers, which completely obscured the female body.
女性たちはほとんど室内の、しかも奥の方で暮らすことが中心でしたから、このように着物の重なり具合の部分に季節を取り入れようと。こちらの今日の装束ですが、立花の花の色をかたどっています。立花は日本では5月に咲く花です。花の色を着物で楽しむということをして、自分たちの美意識を競ったわけです。
With its emphasis on ritual and artifice, it was a beauty ethic that revealed not just the extreme immobility, but also the extreme asceticism of Japanese court life. This was a world in which female goodness was judged not by exemplary conduct as it was in China, but by the beauty of one's calligraphy or by the choice of colours on a kimono sleeve that women seductively revealed from behind a screen.
娘を儒教的に育てるよりも美しく教養高く育てることが家の繁栄につながった。ですから美に関する感覚が鋭いということがそのままその本人の人格となって、そしてつまり恋ですとか結婚に結びついたわけなんですね。
Significantly, as Japanese identity began to express itself through its sense of aesthetics, it also began to develop its own language and literature. Kept apart from official Chinese of the outer world, in the inner world, women communicated in native Japanese called kana, the woman's hand. As a result, a unique phenomenon in world history was born, for unlike in China, where the world of letters was dominated by men, the first flowering of Japanese literature was dominated by women, the most important of whom, in my opinion, was Murasaki Shikibu. Born into a minor branch of the Fujiwara family, Lady Murasaki was educated clandestinely in the Confucian classics by her father. Married at 20 to an older man, after his death, she is said to have entered the court and started writing her finest work, The Tale of Genji. Considered the world's first novel, it tells the story of the Shining Prince, named Genji, whose bloodline is insufficiently royal to inherit the throne. Trapped in social limbo, he engages in a futile search for love and happiness with the women of the Heian court.
Lady Murasaki's contemporaries adored the tale of Genji with its stories of illicit love affairs and court intrigues, which so obviously mirrored their own lives. But the book has endured because Murasaki was a pioneer. She wrote the world's first psychological novel with characters that have emotions and motives that ring true. The book is highly evocative of that mix of melancholy and frivolity that marked the Heian era, but it is also a profound meditation on the meaning of life. It is filled with sadness for the fleeting seasons, the ephemeral beauty of nature, and the fragility of love. Murasaki's characters struggle to find the meaning of life and to understand why there is so much suffering. Eventually, they find their solace in Buddhism, just as Murasaki did in her own life.
In comparison to China, Japanese women found solace in Buddhism because their isolation chimed with the Buddhist idea that all life is suffering. The temple where Murasaki Shikibu is said to have found inspiration for the tale of Genji is now a site of pilgrimage. It is home to numerous national treasures, including her oldest portrait, painted some 2 centuries after her death. And the stunning 13th century Issue Madeira scroll, which shows her gazing at the moon from one of its rooms. These treasures are all the more precious because, like so many women in history, we know so little about the real Murasaki. Her dates of birth and death were not recorded. We don't even know her real name. Murasaki, meaning violet, was the name of one of her heroines, and Shikibu refers to her father's position at court. All we have left of her are fragments. And to me, the most moving, given I'm a writer myself, is her personal inkwell, the very one she is said to have used to write the world's first novel. For me, this is just the most moving, one of the most moving experiences of my life. To see this beautiful inkwell, it is, it's aesthetically beautiful and it's so delicate. And then to know that this could be the very inkwell that Lady Murasaki Shikibu actually used. It's like being taken back 1,000 years and to get in touch with one of the most important artifacts of women's history and also in the history of writing. And here it is, the very, very thing. This is such a rare and incredible experience to have, and I feel so profoundly grateful to have it. What's even more poignant is that the world from which these objects came soon disappeared. By the end of the 11th century, Japan was taken over by the samurai, and in a culture now based on male codes of honor, women lost the little agency they once had. And astonishingly, female inheritance laws wouldn't return until the 1930s. But crucially, the world of Heian women lived on through the book. And to better understand its legacy, I've come to meet Japan's greatest living female novelist, the Buddhist nun, Jakucho Satuchi, for whom reading the tale of Genji at 13 changed her life.
日本の1000年も昔にこんな素晴らしいものがあるかというのでびっくりして、で、もうどうしても小説家になろうと思いました。
Known for novels that confront the taboos of patriarchal Japanese society, she sees within the tale of Genji a subtle feminist message whose promise is finally being fulfilled.
源氏物語の光る源氏は、主人公の光る源氏は大変な女たらしで、もう彼がもうたくさんの女の人を愛するんですけど、彼に愛された女たちは誰も幸せになってません。でそして非常に辛い思いをして、最後にもうその辛さから逃れようとして彼女たちが選んだのが出家です。出家こういうふうになること。
I've read that it took 1,000 years for the relative independence of the Heian women to come back to Japan. Why do you think that is?
男尊女卑のように世界から思われるかもしれないけれども、昔のことを思えば今非常に女が強くなっています。で外で働いてる女の人も多くなってですね、中には男がだんだんダメになってですね、今はもう日本の男に若い男が草食系になるというね、草食系って植物のようだってね言われましてですね、もう性的魅力も何もなくなってるんですよ。ですから今や女の時代が日本には来ていると思います。
Despite centuries of male dominance, the tale of Genji has become central to Japanese cultural identity. And today, beneath the neon masculinity of the modern city, everywhere you look, there are echoes of Murasaki's world. You can see it in the Japanese love of ceremony and ritual, in their sensitivity to nature and the seasons, and most of all, in the status of Heian women writers, national heroines who have become the torchbearers for the potential of women in dark times.
What it all boils down to is something extraordinary, because Japan is the only country I know whose cultural DNA was forged and made by women, and one woman in particular.
But this isn't the end of the story. As Japan fell into the grip of the samurai, China was going through another resurgence, this time under a new dynasty, the Sung of the Qingming scroll, and once again, the roles of women would become central to its story. It was a period of great innovations: printing, clocks, paper money, and a booming free market economy that propelled China's population to 200 million for the first time. In this wealthy, cosmopolitan society, women were highly visible outside the home, running businesses and administering their own property. But it was also a time of great insecurity. In 1125, the Jurchen nomads invaded from the north, pushing the Song dynasty into the south. In the next century, the Mongols captured the entire country, moving the capital to Beijing. The Chinese reacted to these disasters with a new movement called Neo-Confucianism, and within it, a group of male scholars reasserted the traditional ideas of harmony, social order, and gender, first advocated in the Confucian classics. Eventually, when the Ming dynasty drove the Mongols out of China in the 14th century, these scholars' ideas once again became a core part of national identity.
Neo-Confucianism has often been labelled fundamentalist because of its rigid adherence to the written text. But actually it was quite revolutionary. Its founder, Zhou Xi, overturned the old social order and made the family, not the emperor, the role model that state and society was to follow. But the group that really bore the brunt of Neo-Confucianism was women. And ironically, as the home and family became more important, their status within it was diminished. Practically, this meant that daughters no longer had the right to inherit property, wives no longer had the right to keep their dowries, and widows no longer had the right to remarry. Neo-Confucianism was a watershed moment for women. It was the point when their lives really became restrained, both metaphorically and physically.
As in Heian, Japan, this radical reassertion of women's place in the home became synonymous with a beauty ritual that was so extreme it has divided China ever since: foot binding. Today, the world's largest collection of lotus shoes is housed in an anonymous apartment block in downtown Shanghai. The collection of Yang Sharong, whose own mother had bound feet, contains over 1,500 pairs, from the earliest shoes of the Song dynasty to the much smaller ones of the Ming and beyond, by which time bound feet were a mark of Han Chinese identity and a social requirement for marriage. The process itself was excruciating. Starting as young as 5, mothers cracked the bones of their daughters' feet almost in half, folded forcibly their toes under, and swaddled them in a set of bandages which were ever more tightly bound over a process of years.
用这个的这个胶呢，又烤起来，烤起来以后呢，它这个炒的时候，这个步动也加的步动也小了，小了以后呢，可以算出来。那么，假设上也炒当屁股的。
And why the calligraphy brushes?
哦，这个呢就是毛笔呢，就它尖的笔尖，构造的时候呢，我们中国有个籍贯呢，古代有个籍贯呢，就构造的时候呢，那个笔尖呢，毛笔笔尖放在里面，构造里面，什么意思呢？就是要构造像笔尖一样的，标准要小手尖正，要符合这个要求，没有左右分的，啊，像笔尖一样的尖。 就是这个意思。
Embroidered by the women who wore them, these shoes are symbols of the domestic economy to which women were confined. But they also reveal an ugly truth about beauty and fashion, which for some women can be a tool of liberation, but for others, an instrument of male oppression.
Some people may disagree with me, but I say that this shoe represents the end of an era for women, a closing of doors. And to those who argue that foot binding is the ultimate form of female self-expression, I would say that it's the ultimate form of female self-control, and one that's imposed by a harsh ideology.
Practiced by women on women, to many, foot binding has become the ultimate symbol of the victory of Confucian ideology over women's lives. Much like the veil, over time, it became a route to social advancement increasingly adopted by the poor. Officially banned in 1902 by Empress Cixi, astonishingly, footbound women are still alive today in rural China, the last of a 1,000-year legacy.
cô mới thành là vang giết cả thành thành nó mới chỗ cả này cô họ phòng họ này thành lo sự cô bất để xấu nè nè cái当心cô mà chỗ cô nè bị cái cô xấu là nó nè tạo biến cho nè一说nè真一些过去了。你là phóng chủ là phóng chủ là你làm này cái你拿住嘛要法语了这种了，那一黑了房嘛也一锅铲嘛你làm này一黑了可多了靠多了嘛多嘛你靠没出来。
Spending her early life sewing and weaving at home, during communist times, Mrs. Wang was required to work in the fields like every other member of society, earning points for her family's welfare.
收小春也是在城乡镇，收稻春也是在城乡镇。我也吃了分工分嘛，抬得动，大裤子个大风车。我说抬得动啊，我抬了嘛，你们来抬了，我是抬得动。这一年这么抬得动得个6分工分，抬不动这个5分工分。
Now 84, Mrs. Wang has been married to her husband since the age of 14, and 70 years later, 4 generations of her family live under the same roof. Meeting her has been a privilege because it has reminded me that the story of women in Asia isn't just one of blind ideology, however patriarchal and however painful. The truth is that in Asia, entire nations have defined their identities by the roles they accord their women. But what these women stand for, both now and in the past, isn't simply victimhood or endless obedience, but energy, creativity, and irrepressibility.
Ideology and reality are rarely the same, and even at the height of footbinding, women not only contributed to the family, but also to the economies and cultures in which they lived. And to not tell that story too is to tell an untruth. What's been missing from history is exactly what modern Asian women are finally getting today, and that is recognition.